We made a major mistake our first year of gardening in our raised beds, but it turned out to be an image of God's grace in our lives and a reminder that He is constantly working on us. This week, we talk about God's immense grace and how it shapes our hearts to be more like His. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the Olive Shoots Family Podcast, where we talk about family and parenting, homesteading, and the things God is leading us towards. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brittany. We've been married for 3 years, have one little boy, and just got our first piece of land where we plan to build and start our homestead. We are passionate about the family unit and getting back to the basics of the way God created us to live. We have big dreams and are learning what it looks like to pursue those dreams while first trusting God's leading.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. So a few weeks ago, we were talking about how we started our raised beds. We had got them built and started to get them ready for growing our garden. And throughout this whole process, building them was the easy part, but we didn't really want to fill them with just topsoil the whole way because that was super expensive. And so we actually went and got dirt from our property. I went there and just shoveled in dirt into the truck bed and brought it back and did 3 or 4 trips of that over the course of a few weeks. And so we put all this work in and effort in and got them all set up and we started our plants and we started them as seeds indoors under a grow light and very carefully watered them every day, tended to them every day, and then finally transplanted them outside into the beds. And it was going great. For the first few weeks, we started off with just our lettuces. And so we had 2 varieties of lettuce and some spinach, and they were growing so well. I mean, we had, how many was it? Like 2 or 3 I think 2 main dish salads. So enough lettuce for both of us to eat like our main meal in salad. And then several side salads throughout the weeks. And it was great for us because it was working well for us in what we needed those first few weeks. And then it just started to slow down. And as we got past March and into April, we just noticed that there's just not quite as much sunlight getting to our bed. What's going on? And we're not getting quite as much lettuce, and it's not growing as fast as it was. And so we just noticed this problem. And we realized that we built our raised beds in February into January, sometime around then. And there were no leaves on the trees at that point. And so we went and put all this effort in only for the leaves to come in, and now it's blocking a lot of the sunlight.
Yeah, and we had purposely looked at our backyard and we had that conversation and we thought we need to put it in a place where there's going to be sun, obviously. And so we thought we were doing that. And we also have 2 or 3 really big trees and pretty much our entire backyard. Also, we weren't here at this house last summer, so this is the first summer that we've seen it, and it is pretty much our entire backyard is shaded most of the whole day, which is really nice as far as when it gets really hot, we'll be able to enjoy it out there, but it makes it difficult to garden.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing, I said, we got to move the beds. And you were like, we're not moving the beds.
I was like, there's no way we're doing that. It's way too much work.
You were like, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. And so then we were going to try to, he bought a pole saw and was going to try to trim some of the limbs. And then when he got that out there, he realized that these trees are seriously massive. And the limbs that, for one, we would have basically needed to cut the tree down would have been the best thing, but we also weren't going to do that. but they're all stacked on top of each other. So like trimming a limb we can reach doesn't really change a whole lot. And then he realized that for the most part, the lowest limbs that were doing anything were like already how many feet? A lot of feet in the air.
Well, in order to make a real difference, I would have had to get like 50, 60 feet in the air and trim these massive limbs. And we just, for one, we're renting, and two, it would have been a much bigger process than I thought at first.
Yeah. So, and we decided to we talked through like what it would look like to move them, because we have a side part of a yard that doesn't have as much shade. So from like, I don't know, around noon through the rest of the day, it's pretty sunny, pretty much full sun. So we were like, it'd be the perfect place to move it. And honestly, that's what we talked about in the first place. But for some reason, when we actually built them, we forgot that we had talked about that. And yeah.
So I finally came around. At first, I was like, no, we're not moving them. No, we're not going to do this. It's way too much work. Finally came around to the realization that, okay, this is what we need to do.
Or we're not going to have a garden.
Or we're not going to have a garden. And so it was this really long process of digging up the plants that we planted, potting them, moving the soil, moving the beds, raking the topsoil, because it was some really good topsoil and we wanted to save it for the top. We didn't want it to just get mixed in with everything. And so raked the topsoil, shoveled it off into another bin, and then moved the bed, and then moved the soil, and then redid the topsoil and repotted the plants. And it was just hours and hours of work.
And we had 4 by 8 beds that we had to move. And then we ended up adding 2 smaller beds in that process. So, yeah, it seems like not very much, but just all the different steps was definitely very time consuming.
And so I think coming around to that realization that, okay, this is what we need to do, I was frustrated about it because I realized it's the only solution that we have to go forward. It's the only way to do this the right way. But it also meant undoing what I had already done and almost starting from scratch. Not completely, because we already had the soil. I didn't have to move that from our property again. But starting from scratch in that I'm moving the bed, I'm filling it back up, I'm transplanting the plants again, and just all those things. And I think when in like the gardening world or the homesteading world, there's so many people who tell you like, don't make major decisions, don't make major changes to your land or anything like that, or start big projects your first year. Your first year of living on your land is like your opportunity to survey the land and understand what it does and what's normal, and to just get a feel for how things work. And in a small way, I understand why. Because at first, this area in our backyard looked perfect for our garden. But later in the season, when the truth was revealed that, hey, this isn't going to work, that it was harder to do what was right. It was harder for me to say, you know what, even though it's going to take more effort, it's going to take longer, it's going to be more hard work, that this is the way we need to go.
Which thankfully we had done raised beds and not just like dug up our whole backyard and planted them straight in the ground, because that would have been probably more difficult.
Right. But I think that looking at it in that way just gives this image of what parenting and family and life looks like. That this image of, okay, we messed up our garden, we have to move it all, and it's going to be a pain to do it the right way. That I think that happens a lot in our life, and it happens a lot, especially a lot in parenting. And when we just give ourselves the grace and recognize that God has already given us the grace in our lives to make mistakes and then to move forward and doing it the right way, that we're able to better understand our life as sons and daughters of our Father, and also to convey that to our children well, that God's grace holds us, and so we're gonna lavish that on our children as well.
I work in construction, and it's pretty regular that I ache and hurt after a long day's work. But I also want a healthy and natural solution to my pain without the long-term side effects that come from over-the-counter pills. I've been turning to Earthly's Pain Potion for day-to-day relief. Its pain-relieving and anti-inflammatory herb combination have helped me to start my day after waking up sore and to rest after lifting heavy objects all day long. When I need extra or more targeted relief, I use Earthly's Pain Relief Rub with St. John's wort, yarrow, and full-spectrum CBD. Just rub a small amount of the cream on the painful areas for fast soothing and quick relief. The Pain Relief Rub is also safe for pregnant and breastfeeding mothers, as well as children ages 1 and up. I recommend both the Pain Potion and the Pain Relief Rub because they help me get back to my work when I need it most, but also because they are made by a family-owned, made in the USA, and organic company. If you are interested, click the link in the show notes and check out other Earthly Wellness products while you're there. Yes, the link does help support our family. Earthly is generous enough to give a small percentage back to us if you use our link. But I wouldn't be endorsing them if I didn't truly believe in their products.
So I think maybe one of the first ways in this kind of gardening analogy, this image of our complete and utter failure of a garden at first and how we were wanting to do it, points to just the biblical story that God doesn't call parents. He doesn't call able parents who are able to do it all, but rather he equips us to do what he calls us to.
Yeah, and I think about we hear that all the time, like when you're reading through the Bible or listening to sermons of like God didn't call Gideon because he was gonna be able to just go out there and destroy the whole army all by himself and take back the land. Like he didn't call him because he was gonna be able to do it all by himself. He didn't call Moses because he was gonna be able to lead all the people out of Egypt all by himself. Like we hear that all the time, but when I don't think I've thought about it in the perspective of like that's parenting is a calling. We also hear that obviously, and so just thinking about like it's the same thing. God doesn't call us or allow us the blessing of being parents just because we already are going to be professionals at it. Like he knows that we can't do it by ourselves well, and if we don't have his help, it is going to be difficult, and we're going to fail ultimately, and we're still going to fail in our attempt of trying to do it with him. Just like, we see that throughout the biblical story also. Moses and the Israelites failed, but they still went back to God, and he helped them and equipped them for the next task. And I think that's, I don't know, when we were just like unpacking that of like, well, yeah, parenting is a calling, so obviously we don't know how to do it all at the beginning, and like we know that as well. But just thinking of like God's going to equip us as we try to parent well. And like in the gardening thing, we knew what the best idea probably was in the first place, but we didn't like that idea, and it was going to be too difficult. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to try it other way. We wanted to try to just trim the branches first, or try to just see if the sun maybe is going to shine enough. We were like, well, let's just wait a couple days and really, really time it out. But we knew that the best idea was going to be to move it in the first place. We just wanted to see if we could do it our own way first. And then in the end, we were like, well, we're going to have to go with the best way, yeah. Even though it's a lot more work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like, this is, it's encouragement for like the first time parent who is just stepping into parenting and is struggling with the late nights and the lack of sleep and the cries that don't stop some nights, and just all the things that come with parenting. Like, how in the world do I do this? But I think it's equally helpful and encouraging to us, where our son is almost a year and a half old, and we're about to have a little girl, and we've had conversations with friends and with us of just like, we don't know what it's going to be like. We know, like, we feel like we have it down.
Yeah, we
with
just
one,
did it.
but at the same time, like, we're stepping into completely unknown territory of how it's going to work with two instead of just one, and what that
And
that
also,
dynamic
this
is
next
be.
baby is obviously going to be different than our first. So even if like we completely raised Emerson and then started all over, like, it would still be completely different because no kid is the same. So it's just like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then add in that Emerson is a boy and we're going to be having a girl. Of like, I have been able to wrap my head around, what does it look like to train up a young man? But now to think that, and like, okay, what does it look like? Like, I've wrapped my head around the father-son dynamic and relationship. And obviously that's going to grow, and I'm going to learn, and I have not arrived to that dynamic yet. But now wrapping my head around daddy-daughter relationship, of like, in blowing my mind in new ways, and just trying to grasp that, like, I just don't have it figured out. And I think that's okay. That in no point did God ever call people who had it all figured out. I don't think there was a single person ever throughout the biblical story, other than Jesus, who had it figured out, where he didn't teach them and lead them along the way. But
because we wouldn't need him. And we wouldn't, like, our parenting wouldn't be able to point others to Jesus if it was all us and we were professionals at it.
Right. I think that's the point, is that we are not able to do it on our own. And so that points us back to the Father who is able, and who wants to give us his power, his might, his understanding, his wisdom, his patience and mercy and kindness. And ultimately, he wants to use us to pass on his grace to our children, just like he's giving it to us. And maybe if we take that a step further, that if we walk with this a little bit more, that realizing that we're able to make mistakes is great, but then when we make those mistakes, sometimes it can be hard for us to move past them. And so God's grace in our life also liberates us. It frees us from the regret that we have with those mistakes. And so with our garden analogy, like, we can sit here and think about, man, I really wish we had just done this in the first place. We had talked about it a long time ago.
I think I did say that.
Yeah. Why didn't we just
talked about it? What happened? Why did we forget?
Why didn't we just listen to ourselves in the first place? Like, why? Why didn't we just do it the right way the first time? And then in my mind, I'm thinking, like, I already don't have very much time in the day. I probably spent at least 6 or 7 hours digging up the plants, repotting them, moving the soil, moving the beds, doing all this stuff. Like, that time would have been much spent if I had just done it right in the first place. And it's really easy to sit there and just think about and regret. And why did I make that mistake? Why did I do it that way? And in our lives and in parenting, I think we can sit back and see the mistakes and think on the mistakes that we've made in parenting and just in life in general. And we can beat ourselves up over it. And we can recognize that, okay, yeah, I wish I wouldn't have done it that way. And we can move on, and we can grow from it and learn from it. But sometimes we just dwell on it over and over again. And we just live in that past mistake, where in our parenting, maybe we realized that the best way of doing something is not what we did with the first two kids. And so kid 3, 4, 5, 6 had our best, or whatever that is for you. That had our,
just adding on the kids here.
Yeah, sorry. The latter kids had our best parenting in this one particular way, but the first two didn't. We were still trying to figure it out. And so it just eats at us that, man, I really wish we had learned this with our first kid at this time. I really wish we wouldn't have done it that way. And maybe getting hung up on what that might have done in their life, or because I didn't do it right, how is this going to impact their future and change their lives in this massively negative way? And I think there is grace in that God gives us grace to make mistakes in our parenting and learn along the way. And when we have a heart of repentance and have a heart of acknowledgement that we aren't perfect, we're able to make those mistakes and go to our children and say, you know what, buddy, I admit I handled this better with your sister than I did with you, and I'm sorry about that. And I wish I would have done it differently, but we can't go back and change it. But I promise that moving forward, we're going to continue to try to do it the right way. And not living in those past moments. Recognizing that, yes, there was a better way and maybe I shouldn't have done that way. That's a good thing. But moving forward, admitting wrongdoing, admitting guilt, admitting whatever, and then moving forward together with your children and saying, but I'm continuing to grow and I'm going to keep getting better at this with you.
Yeah, and I think it's like in that book we kind of did a podcast on talking about the parenting book by Paul David Tripp that we had read or were reading through, and we're still reading through it. And one of the things that he talked about was like in the grace part was that we were being parented by our Father God just as we are parenting our kids, and like recognizing that same type of grace that he shows us when we mess up, and when we run to him, he's always there, and just remembering that even like we're going to be parented by God for our entire life, and reflecting that to our kids. And he even said like how humbling is it to be the parent that tells their kids like, yeah, I'm parenting you, that's God placed me in authority to be your parent, but I'm also being parented at the same time by God. And then also like that lets them know and just reminds them that it's authority is not something you ever completely grow out of. Like they're not going to always be under our authority and our rules or whatever, but we would hope that they will continue to fall under God's authority and to understand that they still want his guidance, even as a 20-year-old, as a 30-year-old, as a 60-year-old. Like, not that when they leave our house, they just have no rules and there's no authority. Like, obviously, there's still the law and there's still, and that's easier to wrap our minds around, I think, of like, yeah, we still have to follow the law. We still have to follow the rules of our country whenever we leave our parents' house. We can't just go be reckless.
Not the Old Testament law, but
the laws of the land where we live.
Right.
But I think that's one thing, like teenagers, as they are ending the time of being home or ending a high school graduation or whatever, they just crave that freedom, and they're like, I won't have to listen to my parents anymore. I'll be able to make my own rules. And just them growing up hearing we don't always make our own rules. We follow under God's authority, and he's parenting us. And when we mess up, we face consequences. And he has grace, unending grace upon grace upon grace. But we're still being parented daily. And so it's like that when they do near that time where they're just ready to be done with us, or ready to be done with not ready to be done with us, but ready to have that freedom that feels like freedom because they can make their own choices in a different way, that it's transferred to now I'm not just gonna be on my own and do whatever I want. I'm gonna seek God because he's been parenting my parents and now he's parenting me. And like, I don't know. I just think that's a cool picture.
Mm-hmm.
And also just a way of like those days that it feels like were drained and we've been correcting. I mean, right now we're in toddler phase, so we've been saying no and just trying to teach. We can't open that drawer, or we can't get the potatoes off of the counter and bang them on the floor over and over again. Like, just silly. And it's the same thing over and over. Like, no, no. And just trying to teach what no means, you know? And I think that when we get to the end of the day and we're like, okay, I'm not saying no anymore. I'm just gonna whatever. Like that grace that we remember that God has given us an insane amount of grace, and that in turn gives us the grace to give to our kids. Like when we feel empty, we look to God, and that's how we get filled up to be able to continue to pour into our kids,
Mm-hmm.
and to continue to parent on the days that it seems like it's just the same thing over and over.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point, that God is constantly changing our hearts and molding us to be like him. And, I think of, like, you mentioned we're in the toddler phase right now, and just, we have had those moments of, I am tired. Just please just do what I asked you to do. Just like listen to me. And we just start getting irritated and
Or instead of continuing to parent, I think the way, not continuing to parent, but continuing to handle it, we're just like, okay, well, we're just going to go outside, which is a good detour solution. But I don't know. It's not like we don't get irritated and like lash out in anger or anything. It's just irritated more and like shutting down and like, well, he's not really hurting himself right now.
or irritated and just like our tone changes or
Yeah.
something like that, right? And so we experience that irritation and start getting frustrated. And there's been moments where we've had nights of that, and we just our nights get more difficult. But we've also had moments of experiencing that frustration and that irritation, and remembering that, okay, yeah, I'm frustrated right now, but in the same way that I need to be giving our son grace, God has given me grace time and time again, over and over again.
Yeah, and that was another statement I heard recently was, we are a lot more like our kids than we're not. Like in our relationship with our kids versus our relationship with God, we're a lot more like them, even as a toddler, than we're not, because we do the same silly stuff that God's like, no, don't do that. No, don't do that. No, remember, I said not to worry. You're worrying again. Like, we do that same stuff, and it's like crazy to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when we look at the biblical story of just how God views this, and how God does this all the time, I think of like the story of Pharaoh, and how his heart was hardened. And when we think about that image, this is also from the parenting book. When we think about that image of a hardened heart, what that means is that he was refusing to accept change. He was refusing to admit something might be different, and refusing to receive the challenge of God showing him that he was supreme, that he was more powerful than any of the Egyptian gods, that he was more powerful than Pharaoh, and that he was going to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. And he just refused to admit that. And when we think about the opposite of what a softened heart looks like, it's a heart that is malleable, that it can be molded and formed and changed and grown and developed, and all these different things. And so when we see God's grace throughout our lives, that we're able to grow and adapt and listen to God's direction and his voice and his guidance in our life. And like for us, we're able to more easily see in the moment that our frustration and our irritation should point us back to God's grace rather than point us to anger or point us to giving up and just leaving something alone or backing out. But rather it is to push into the grace that God has given us, and our actions should flow out of that into loving our son in that moment when we're just like, dude, we've asked you 10 times to stop touching the onions. Can you stop touching the onions? And so yeah, just that God's grace, it changes us and it grows us and it leads us to be the image that we were always meant to be of sharing God's goodness to the world around us and to our children and the people around us. So the moral of the story is, when you plant your garden beds in the wrong place, that there's grace, that good things can come out of it, that even if you're not the best gardener in the world and you make mistakes your first year of planting your garden, that it's okay. There's many years to come. There's lessons to learn, that there are skills to develop. It's going to be okay. And that you'll grow and become a better gardener over time. That you don't have to dwell in those mistakes and sit there and regret on what should have happened and what shouldn't have happened. But rather, you're going to become a better gardener than you were before through those mistakes. I think
it's almost like sounds silly because like we're not going to sit on the mistake that we made on our garden for that long, because that would seem silly. Like in the moment I did say, why did we do this way? And you were like, well, it doesn't matter anymore. We just got to move it. We can't go back and change what happened. But in that moment, I think it's a lot easier for you to say that to me in reference to us putting our garden beds in the wrong place than it is in reference of parenting when we make that mistake. It seems less silly to dwell on it, but it is just as silly because the same is true. We can't go back and change what already happened in the past. We just have the choice to change it in the future, or to go and address the issue and then move forward in it. And so even though it seems like the gardens thing, like why would you keep fussing about it? You can't change it. It's the same thing in parenting. We can't change what we did yesterday, or even in our life. We can't change what we did. We can only decide to go make it right and then move on and make it better in the future.
Yeah. So I think just as we, in this episode, just to remember that there is grace in our parenting, there is grace in what God is leading us towards, that He did not give us with, He did not send us home with the manual on what to do and how to do it when our kids are doing whatever it is they're going to do, that they're being crazy, that they're being disobedient, that they're being loud when we don't want them to be, any of those things. That He didn't equip the called. He called. He didn't call the equipped. He equipped the called. And that as parents, He is equipping us. He's in the middle of equipping us and leading us and teaching us how He wants us to parent. That our mistakes don't hold us back from where He is leading us. And that He is shaping and changing and growing our heart as we speak. We just have to submit to Him, to listen to Him, and to recognize the immense grace that He has given us time and time again. We are so thankful for you guys. And we hope that this episode has just opened your eyes to see God's grace around you. That He immensely loves you and cares for you and is growing you into the person He wants you to be. And that is a process. It's a process that comes with mistakes and learning along the way. And so just as we seek after Him, that we submit to Him, we listen to Him, that He is forming us into the parents we were created to be. that there is grace in that, and there is future grace in things to come in our families, in our lives, and as we follow in the footsteps of Jesus. Talk to you guys next week. See ya.